Prove you know the man who built this city's skyline, or get lost." That's what the branch manager hissed, dangling the cashier's check as if it were a forgery. The entire bank fell silent, turning to watch a black woman be publicly dismantled. Security guards began to move in. Patrons started to whisper. She didn't even blink. You're about to find out why she refused to surrender, why she held her ground against them all. But you have to stick around to see how this story ends. Tell us in the comments what you would do in her position and where you're watching from. And make sure to like and follow so you don't miss the conclusion. The late afternoon sun of a blistering July day cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Pinnacle Financial Group, a steel and glass titan in the heart of downtown Chicago. Its granite floors shone like a frozen lake. The lobby thrummed with the quiet efficiency of wealth, a low symphony of muted conversations, the soft tapping of keyboards, and the air-conditioned chill that defied the heat wave outside. Alana Hayes stood patiently in line, a dark brown leather briefcase at her side. Her breathing was even, her gaze focused but serene. She wore a tailored linen suit in a deep emerald green, elegant and professional, accented by simple gold earrings. She knew perception was currency here, and on this day, she wanted to leave no room for error. But there was an undercurrent in the air, a familiar and sour note of skepticism she had learned to anticipate. She took a deep, fortifying breath as the line advanced. Around her, people in expensive suits checked their watches and scrolled through their phones while oversized screens flashed queue numbers in a cold, corporate blue. When her turn arrived, she approached the counter with a polite, controlled smile, setting her check on the cool stone. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I need to deposit this, please." The teller, a young man named Kevin with a name tag and a practiced smile, gave Alana a cursory glance before his eyes landed on the check. Alana saw the shift immediately. Kevin's professional veneer fractured for a split second, revealing a flash of doubt, a tightening around his lips. He said nothing at first. Instead, he picked up the check with a theatrical slowness, as if it were suspicious contraband, holding it up to the overhead light. Alana waited, her patience a shield against the rising tide of frustration in her chest. Her heartbeat quickened. She had steeled herself for this moment. The check was drawn on this very bank. It was for a substantial but not astronomical amount, signed with a bold, authoritative hand, Marcus Thorne, chairman, her husband's name. But to people like Kevin, that signature was an invitation for scrutiny. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Kevin said, his tone flat. Alana provided it instantly, her state driver's license ready in her wallet. Kevin barely looked at it before placing it on the counter and turning the check over again. "Do you have another form of identification?" he asked, his voice neutral but carrying a sharp edge. Alana met his gaze, her own tone unwavering. "That is a government-issued photo ID." Kevin's mouth thinned. "It's required for deposits of this size," he stated, but his eyes darted from her face to the signature and back again. The implication was clear. Alana fought the urge to sigh. This was a tired old script. She simply opened her wallet further, retrieving her university faculty ID, a corporate credit card, and her health insurance card, arranging them in a neat row on the counter as if presenting evidence. Kevin inspected each one with painstaking deliberation, causing the line behind Alana to swell with restless energy. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd, a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Alana felt their gazes like needles on her skin. She would not turn around. She would not dignify their judgment with a reaction. She had every right to be in this bank. She had every right to deposit this check. and she would not be cowed into submission. "Is there an issue?" she asked, her voice a calm oasis in the rising tension. Kevin didn't reply directly. Instead, he leaned away from her slightly, a subtle physical distancing, and pressed a button on his desk phone. "Mr. Davison, I need you at Teller Station 4, he announced, his voice tight with a strained authority, as if calling for a manager to handle a security threat. Alana's eyes drifted to the nameplate on his desk. Kevin, Client Services Specialist. The title felt like a bitter joke. She stood her ground, her posture impeccable, her jaw set. A moment later, Mr. Davison emerged from a glass-walled office. He was a tall man in his 50s with thinning hair and a suit that was just a little too tight. He scanned the scene, his eyes landing on Alana before he plastered on a thin, insincere smile. "What seems to be the trouble here?" he asked Kevin, pointedly ignoring Alana. "We've got a large check, and I'm having difficulty with the verification," Kevin explained. Davison didn't even acknowledge the stack of IDs Alana had provided. He picked up the check and studied it with an exaggerated frown. "Marcus Thorne, you claim?" he said, making the name sound like an outlandish fantasy. Alana's blood ran hot, but she refused to let it show. "Yes," she replied coolly. "He's my husband." Davison's eyebrows shot up in feigned disbelief. "Your husband," he echoed, trading a look with Kevin, who smirked. "Well, this is a very significant amount. I'm not sure we can process this for you today without further verification." Alana held her breath, counting to 3 before she spoke. "It's a cashier's check drawn on this institution. It is signed by your chairman. What else could you possibly need to verify?" Davison's expression hardened. "Ma'am," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "I'm going to need you to remain calm. There's no need to become defensive." Defensive? The word landed like a carefully set trap. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't sworn. Her expression hadn't even changed. But that word was designed to paint her as the aggressor, to signal to everyone watching that she was the problem. She was irrational. She was out of place. The line behind her stirred with palpable impatience. A man cleared his throat loudly. Another sighed with dramatic frustration. Davison turned to them, offering an apologetic gesture. "So sorry for the inconvenience, everyone," he announced, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. "We're just managing a complicated matter here." Kevin let out a soft snort. Alana's mouth was bone dry. She wanted to unleash the fury building inside her, to snatch the check from his hand. But she held herself in check. Her expression remained placid. Her mother had taught her that. Never let them see you crack. Davison heaved a theatrical sigh. "Tell you what," he said finally. "Why don't you have a seat over there while we look into this further?" He gestured vaguely toward a lone chair by a wilting ficus tree, a place for her to be put away, out of sight. Alana collected her IDs slowly, meticulously. She would not rush. She slid them back into her wallet, lifted her chin, and locked eyes with Davison. "Very well," she said softly. "I will wait." She walked to the chair with measured grace, refusing to be dismissed. As she sat, she watched Davison and Kevin confer over the check, whispering and casting smug glances in her direction. Around her, the bank's patrons went about their business, pretending not to stare, pretending everything was normal. But Alana saw. She saw it all. And she would not forget a single word, a single smirk, a single insult veiled as procedure. Because this was far from over. Alana sat ramrod straight in the stark, uncomfortable chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of her briefcase. She watched Davison and Kevin huddle together, treating her check like a potential explosive device. The ambient hum of the lobby, filled with the polite chatter of other transactions, only served to amplify her profound isolation. She could feel the stares, sense the whispered judgments, but she kept her spine erect, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shrink. Finally, Davison straightened up, dropping the check on Kevin's counter with a flourish of irritation. He shot a look at Alana, a smirk twisting his lips. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice loud enough to command the attention of the entire room. "I'm going to need you to come back to the counter." Alana rose, taking a moment to smooth her suit before she walked back, each step a deliberate act of defiance. She met Davison's gaze, challenging him to make the first move. He did not disappoint. "We're still experiencing considerable difficulty verifying this," he announced, his voice booming for the benefit of his audience. "I'm afraid you will have to step aside for now, so we can serve our other clients." Alana blinked, her expression unreadable. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice a tightrope of control over a chasm of rage. Davison spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. "You're holding up the line," he said, his smile patronizing. "We can't be expected to inconvenience our paying customers, can we?" He glanced meaningfully at the line, where several people now stood with folded arms, watching the confrontation with open impatience. A few seemed to be enjoying the show. "Nobody has all day to wait for you to sort this out," Davison added, the insult hanging in the air. Heat flooded Alana's cheeks, but she suppressed it, breathing slowly, maintaining her composure. She opened her mouth to argue, to state that she, too, was a customer. But Davison cut her off. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, menacing tone. "Listen," he hissed, his eyes narrowing. "If you don't move aside right now, I'll have security escort you out." The threat was undisguised, and the hint of pleasure he took in delivering it was nauseating. Alana's grip on her briefcase tightened. The lobby noise seemed to fade into a muffled hush as people leaned in, sensing the climax of the drama. A woman directly behind Alana scoffed and muttered, "For God's sake, just get out of the way," her voice dripping with contempt. Davison's eyes flickered to the woman with a brief, satisfied glance before returning to Alana. "You see," he said, "you're upsetting the other clients." Kevin covered his mouth to hide a snicker, his attempt to look busy at his computer screen, utterly unconvincing. Alana's mouth was as dry as dust. She knew this tactic: manufacture a problem, escalate the situation, and then blame the target for creating a disturbance. She forced her voice to remain steady. "I'm not moving," she said, her tone quiet but unshakable. Her chin rose a fraction. "I have a right to be here." Davison's fake smile vanished. He straightened up and gestured sharply to Kevin. "Call security." Kevin complied with an unnerving eagerness, pressing a button on his desk phone with a decisive jab. "Greg," he said with feigned sweetness, "we need you at the front." Seconds later, the heavy thud of rubber-soled shoes on granite announced the arrival of security. Greg, the bank's head of security, appeared, a large, broad-shouldered man in a crisp navy uniform. His expression was stern, and his hand rested casually on the thick belt at his waist, his fingers near the holster at his side. A clear and practiced display of authority. He didn't greet Alana. His eyes were cold and evaluative, as if she were an unstable element that needed to be contained. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice low but carrying an implicit warning. Davison didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, pointing at Alana as if she were an object to be removed. "This woman is refusing to cooperate. She's causing a scene and disrupting our business." causing a scene. Alana felt a surge of indignation. She hadn't raised her voice. She had barely moved. She had done nothing but calmly insist on her right to service. But Greg's gaze was fixed on her, his hand still positioned near his belt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a carefully modulated monotone that still dripped with menace. "I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the counter now." The bank grew even quieter, grew even. A child's question, "What's wrong with that lady?" was quickly shushed by a parent. Alana could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her, watching, judging, some even savoring her humiliation. She swallowed hard. She wanted to flee. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a primal instinct to escape the public shaming. But her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "You do not run. You make them see you for who they are." She squared her shoulders. "I am a client of this bank," she stated clearly. "I am here to deposit a check. I have provided identification. I am not leaving." Greg's expression tightened. His fingers tapped his belt, a silent, percussive threat. Kevin's smirk had morphed into a full-blown grin. Davison threw his hands up as if he were the long-suffering victim. "See what I have to deal with?" he announced to the lobby. "We try to be reasonable, and this is the thanks we get. How are we supposed to help our real clients with this going on?" A few people in line nodded, fully siding with the performance. Alana's vision swam with fury, but her voice remained impossibly calm. "I am not being disruptive," she said. "You are refusing to serve me." Greg took a step closer, his physical presence looming. "Ma'am," he said, his voice colder now, "don't make me remove you." His hand moved to the radio on his shoulder, his thumb hovering over the button, signaling his readiness to escalate without speaking a word. Alana's breath caught. She tried to respond, but her voice failed her. Davison offered one last smirk. "See?" he said to the onlooking customers, turning his back on her as if the matter was concluded. "She just doesn't listen." Alana finally found her voice, forcing the words out. "I want to speak to your superior," she managed to say, infuriated by the quaver in her tone. Davison let out a dark chuckle. "You're looking at him." At that, Greg stood even taller, puffing his chest out as he positioned himself between Alana and the counter, physically blocking her, erasing her. The lobby was a theater now, the audience rapt, waiting for the final act. Alana's heart hammered. She refused to break down. She refused to beg. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, gathering her strength for whatever was to come. Alana's breathing grew shallow as Greg loomed in front of her, his uniformed bulk a living barricade that separated her from the counter, from her check, from any semblance of fair service. Around them, the silence of the lobby deepened into something oppressive, charged with that peculiar social electricity that happens when an audience senses blood in the water. Customers shifted uncomfortably in line, but did not look away. They watched with avid fascination, their curiosity tinged with disdain. And in that hush, Davison smirked, satisfied with his performance of authority, when suddenly the lobby doors swung wide with a cheerful electronic chime and a gust of conditioned air. In walked Mr. Sterling. He was an older white man with a practiced confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. His tailored charcoal suit draping perfectly over his frame, silver hair combed neatly, a gleaming watch peeking from his cuff. He paused at the entrance with a faintly annoyed expression, as if surprised by the frozen tableau before him. Davison's reaction was instant and almost comically obsequious. He straightened so fast, Alana heard his spine crack, his smugness vanishing, replaced by a polished, servile grin that split his face. "Mr. Sterling," he practically sang. Ignoring Alana as though she had evaporated, he took 2 quick steps away from her, brushing past Greg without so much as a glance, and extended his hand eagerly. "Sir, welcome back. I'm so sorry about the disruption. We'll clear this right up." The words dripped with false warmth, and Sterling barely tilted his chin in acknowledgement, eyeing the line with faint disapproval. "Davison," he said brusquely, "what's the holdup?" Davison leaned closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial hush that was nevertheless designed for everyone to hear. Nothing important, sir. Just a confusing situation we're handling. Please allow me to take you to my office to expedite your business. Can I get you a coffee? Anything at all?" Alana watched this performance with something like nausea churning in her gut. The casual dismissal in Davison's entire bearing was unmistakable, as if her presence were a stain to be mopped up before the real client arrived. She felt the eyes of the room shift again, this time from her to Sterling, back to her, and she saw the understanding crystallize in their expressions. He's important. She isn't. Davison's sycophantic grin widened further when Sterling made a small, dismissive noise, waving him off impatiently. "Just make sure I'm not waiting," Sterling said sharply, glancing at Alana for half a second with a raised brow that suggested mild irritation at the delay she represented, then flicked his gaze away like she was an object, a misplaced chair blocking the path. "Of course, sir, of course," Davison fawned, turning and snapping his fingers at Kevin. "Get started on Mr. Sterling's paperwork immediately. Priority service." Kevin scrambled to obey, his smirk gone in favor of anxious efficiency, and Alana felt her own body lock up tighter, every muscle a coiled spring as her jaw clenched against the molten humiliation burning her throat. She watched as Davison escorted Sterling away, practically hovering, every sycophantic word dripping from his mouth like honey. Greg's stance relaxed slightly now that the real problem had been removed from Davison's attention. Alana didn't move, didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. The bank resumed its low murmur, but it had a different tone now, more acidic, charged with the knowledge that the show had shifted, but not ended. Near the far end of the counter, Jenna, a young teller with bright eyes and a ponytail that swung when she talked, nudged her colleague in the ribs with her elbow, the movement casual, conspiratorial. Alana saw it even from her distance. She saw Jenna lean in, trying to keep her voice low, but failing just enough to ensure Alana heard every syllable. "Did you see her?" Jenna whispered with mocking incredulity, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Honestly, who does she think she is? Walking in here like she can just sign something like that." Her colleague gave a weak, uncomfortable chuckle, but didn't stop her. Jenna's smile sharpened. "I mean," she added, voice growing more mocking, her eyes flicking directly to Alana and locking for just an instant before flitting away with practiced cruelty. "It's not like just anyone can waltz in here and get our chairman's signature. It's laughable. Really. So embarrassing." Alana felt the words stab her in the chest, sharp and cold. Her fingers spasmed around the handle of her briefcase, the knuckles turning white. She kept her breathing even, refusing to let them see the quake in her belly, the dizziness behind her eyes. She heard a snort from another teller who had picked up the joke, who found it funny enough to pass along. The laughter was quiet, but unmistakable, a ripple of shared contempt that traveled down the row of desks like a virus. Alana stood frozen in it, the humiliation sour on her tongue, knowing this was exactly what they wanted, to reduce her, to humiliate her, to make her small enough to forget. Greg glanced back at her, the faintest curl at the corner of his lip. Not quite a smile, but a flicker of private satisfaction that said he had seen this all before and enjoyed every second. Alana felt her vision blur for an instant, the fluorescent lights going soft at the edges. She blinked hard, forcing herself to stay grounded, to stand straight, to not let the tears forming in her throat spill over. She would not give them the pleasure. She would not give them anything. She felt the entire bank become smaller and smaller around her, as though the walls were pressing inward, the smell of floor polish and printer toner turning sour in her nose. The buzz of conversation resolving into pointed phrases, snide jokes, veiled insults. The smirk on Jenna's face hardened into something triumphant when she caught Alana's eye again, her expression saying everything words wouldn't dare. "You don't belong here. You never did." Alana forced herself to look away, her heart pounding like a drum, her breathing shallow. She focused on her briefcase, on the perfect seam of the stitching, on the small scratch near the zipper she'd meant to fix. Anything to avoid meeting those gloating eyes. She felt heat crawl up her neck, felt the rage and shame battling in her chest like wild animals. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, refusing to break. All the while, Davison's obsequious voice droned in the background, fading only when he led Sterling into the private office, promising him swift, personalized service, coffee, absolute deference. The lobby settled back into its rhythm, but the undercurrent had changed. She could feel it. The judgment, the smirks, the quiet amusement at her expense. Alana pressed her lips together so hard they hurt. She would not cry. She would not plead. She would not move. She would stand there as long as it took, and though every part of her screamed to run, she planted her feet and stayed. She stayed because she refused to give them the satisfaction of her retreat. Alana stood her ground, even as the quiet hum of the bank seemed to turn sharper. Every whispered comment slicing at her like paper cuts she forced herself not to acknowledge. She could feel the heat of their stares on her back, the dismissive pity from a few, and the eager anticipation of drama from others. Her grip on her briefcase was ironclad, her knuckles pale. She heard Jenna's snide laugh fade behind her as Davison reappeared from his meeting with Mr. Sterling. His smile wiped away the second he laid eyes on her. He walked back toward the counter, his face settling into a look of exaggerated patience that fooled no one. "Still here?" he asked loudly, drawing the attention of half the room. Alana lifted her chin, refusing to flinch. "I'm waiting for you to finish verifying my check," she said evenly. Davison's eyes narrowed, the polite veneer cracking. He snatched the check from Kevin's hand without breaking eye contact with Alana, and held it up like it was evidence in a trial. "This?" he scoffed, raising his voice for the benefit of the onlookers. "You mean this piece of paper you expect us to honor?" Alana swallowed hard, refusing to let her gaze waver. "It's valid," she said, her voice low but steady. "It's drawn on this bank, and signed by your chairman." Davison let out a sharp bark of laughter that was completely devoid of humor. "Our chairman," he repeated with heavy sarcasm, waving the check in front of her face before lowering it just enough to leer. "Let me save you and everyone here some time." He paused, letting that phrase sink in. Alana felt the room shift as the people in line perked up, leaning closer to hear the spectacle. Davison took a deep breath, and then, without warning, tore the check cleanly in two. The rip of the paper seemed to echo off the granite floors like a gunshot. Alana flinched despite herself, a gasp catching in her throat. She felt heat flood her face as her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Davison didn't miss it. He smiled like a predator, waving the torn halves dismissively. "Don't waste our time," he said coldly, voice dripping contempt. We have real clients to serve." The woman who had complained earlier let out a triumphant snort, muttering, "Finally," under her breath. Another man in line chuckled audibly, shaking his head in theatrical disapproval. Alana's mouth worked for a moment before she forced the words out. "That was my property," she said, her voice ragged. "You had no right." Davison's eyes gleamed with triumph. "I have every right to protect this bank from fraud," he shot back. "And you standing here insisting we honor a fake check is the textbook definition of fraud." The words seemed to hang in the air, charged like static. Alana blinked, momentarily stunned. Fraud. It wasn't just an insult. It was an accusation. Her heart began to pound, the familiar terror rising in her chest, cold and suffocating. She opened her mouth to deny it, to demand he stop. But Davison was already turning away from her, waving to Kevin to call the next customer forward, like she didn't exist. The line shuffled forward, people stepping past her with deliberate avoidance, their gazes sliding over her like she was invisible. Or worse, dirty. Kevin's eyes flicked to her with open mockery before settling on the next customer, his smile suddenly professional and sweet. Alana felt her knees threaten to buckle, but she locked them, refusing to fall. Her mind raced. She needed to do something. Anything. She lifted her voice, shaking now with fury and humiliation. "You can't do that," she said louder than she intended. The words cracked, but they carried. Davison paused, glancing back at her over his shoulder with false surprise. "Excuse me?" Alana's breath came in ragged pulls. "You destroyed my check. You accused me of fraud. You have no proof. I want to speak to your supervisor." Davison turned fully now, his smile gone. He took 2 slow steps back toward her, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You want to escalate this?" he asked, voice dropping dangerously. "You really want to keep making a scene in front of all these people?" Alana felt the weight of the room press in, the eyes digging into her. She forced herself to nod. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to talk to someone above you." Davison sneered. "There's no one above me in this branch," he said flatly. "But if you insist on causing trouble—" He jerked his chin at Greg, who had been watching silently from a few feet away, arms folded across his barrel chest. Greg straightened immediately, his expression hardening. He placed a deliberate hand on his radio, thumb hovering over the transmit button. "Ma'am," Greg intoned, voice suddenly loud enough for the entire bank to hear. "I'm going to need you to leave the premises immediately. If you refuse to comply, I'll have to call the police." The word police dropped like a hammer. Alana's mouth went dry. She heard an audible gasp from somewhere in the line. A woman she couldn't see muttered, "Oh my God, is she serious?" Another voice, male, deeper, chimed in with thinly veiled disgust. "Yeah, call them. Don't need scammers here." Alana's vision blurred again, this time with hot, stinging tears of rage and terror she couldn't blink away fast enough. She shook her head desperately. "I'm not leaving," she choked out. "I haven't done anything wrong." Greg's face remained carved from stone. "That's your choice," he said flatly, pressing the button on his radio. A sharp squawk of static filled the air. "Dispatch, this is Greg. I've got a situation. Possible attempted fraud. Uncooperative subject refusing to vacate." The words crashed into Alana like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, shaking her head violently. "No," she gasped. "No, that's not true." But the words sounded weak, childish, pathetic even to her own ears. Davison folded his arms, his satisfaction clear as day. "Don't say we didn't give you chances," he said in a falsely regretful tone that was pure poison. Around her, Phones came out. She saw the glint of lenses. Customers were recording her, some openly, others pretending to text. She heard snippets of conversation. "This is wild." "She's really going to jail." "Honestly, what did she think would happen?" Alana's breathing came in harsh sobs now, her briefcase dangling limply from one hand. She felt like she was underwater, everything muffled and distorted. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Greg's voice crackled over the radio again. "Copy that. Waiting on confirmation. Standing by." The hush in the bank was electric now, the entire room straining forward for the next act in the drama. Jenna was grinning from her station, whispering to the teller next to her with gleeful disbelief. Alana saw it all. She saw every sneer, every mocking glance, every delighted smirk. And deep in her chest, something cracked, something raw and furious she had kept caged for too long, even as her body refused to move, refused to run, refused to give them what they wanted. Alana could feel every eye in the bank, trained on her as though she were some sideshow spectacle. Her humiliation served up for public consumption like a cruel matinee performance. Her pulse thundered in her ears as Greg stood looming at her side, radio still crackling with faint static, and the taste of bile threatened at the back of her throat while she forced herself to stay upright, refusing to crumble onto the polished granite floor. Davison slowly approached her again, hands clasped behind his back in a parody of calm professionalism that only made his contempt more pronounced. He let his gaze travel lazily over her with open judgment before finally stopping on her face. He sighed heavily, as though she were a burden he could barely tolerate. "Well," he drawled, raising his voice just enough so the waiting customers would hear. "If you want us to even consider honoring this check, you're going to need to do something you seem very reluctant to do." Alana blinked hard, trying to hold his gaze despite the sting of unshed tears. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I already gave you my ID, my faculty card, everything you asked for," she rasped, each word scraping her raw throat like sandpaper. Davison smiled thinly. "That's not good enough," he said. "This is a very large sum, after all. Surely you understand we can't just take your word for it." He glanced around meaningfully, encouraging the audience of bystanders to share in his skepticism, and Alana heard a low murmur of agreement ripple through the room. She swallowed, feeling the words stick in her dry mouth. "What more do you want from me?" she managed, hating the tremor in her voice. Davison cocked his head, his eyes cold and sharp. "Proof," he said simply. Alana frowned, confused despite her growing dread. "Proof of what?" Davison's lip curled in disdain. "Proof of your relationship to whoever signed this check," he said slowly, enunciating every syllable like she was a child who couldn't comprehend language. "You're telling us it's from the chairman of this bank, your husband, you claim, but you don't have a single shred of proof to back that up. A photo? A marriage certificate? A phone call? Anything?" The room went even quieter, if that was possible. Alana felt the blood drain from her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her thoughts scattered in a haze of panic and fury. Her wedding band felt heavy on her finger, burning like an accusation she couldn't answer. She wrapped her fingers around it protectively, her chest rising and falling in short, jerky breaths. "That's absurd," she finally managed to whisper, voice cracking. "No one else here has to prove they're married to cash a check." Davison's eyes gleamed, sensing blood in the water. "No one else here is claiming to be married to our chairman," he retorted smoothly, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. He turned to Greg, who watched him passively, and then back to Alana. "Look at it from our perspective. It's a matter of security. Fraud is a real concern. We can't have anyone walk in here and say they know someone powerful and expect us to just hand over the money. You understand, don't you?" Alana's vision swam. She realized with sick horror that people in line were nodding, mumbling agreement. The solidarity was with him, not her. A woman muttered, "Can't blame them," under her breath. A man near the front snorted. "If she really knew him, she'd have proof," he stage whispered to his companion. Alana felt like she was drowning. She closed her eyes for half a second, struggling to keep her voice even. "Please," she said, her voice dropping low. "Can we speak about this somewhere private? You're making this into a spectacle." Davison barked a harsh, humorless laugh that bounced off the granite floor and seemed to pierce straight through her. "Oh," he mocked, arching an eyebrow. "Now you want privacy? Now that everyone sees what's happening? A bit late for that, don't you think?" Alana felt the ground tilt under her. She tried to explain again. "I don't want to make a scene," she insisted desperately. "Just please, let's discuss this in your office, away from everyone." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she pressed her lips together, refusing to let the sob out. Davison's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. He leaned in just slightly, close enough for only her to hear, though he made sure the posture was visible enough to look threatening to anyone watching. "What's the matter?" he said, voice soft and venomous. "Scared now? You should have thought about that before trying to pull this stunt." Alana's breath hitched painfully in her chest. She swallowed again and tried to plead, her voice trembling. "Please, I just want to resolve this." Davison straightened abruptly, his smile gone, replaced by the stony mask of authority. He spoke in a loud, clear voice that carried through the lobby. "I'm afraid we have nothing else to discuss," he declared. "You can either provide proof of your connection to the signer of this check right now, in front of everyone here, or you can leave the premises." Alana's mouth dropped open in horror. Her hands shook. She saw Greg shift behind Davison, crossing his arms with satisfaction, the radio still crackling at his shoulder like a reminder of how quickly this could escalate even further. The silence in the lobby was absolute now, the air thick with expectation and cruel curiosity. A child's voice broke it. "Mommy, why is that lady crying?" A woman shushed the child harshly, but the words hung in the air like poison. Alana tried to speak, but nothing came out except a strangled sob she couldn't swallow down in time. Davison smiled then, a small, cold curve of the lips that showed no real joy, only triumph. "I'll take that as your answer," he said smoothly, as if concluding a business transaction. He made a show of brushing imaginary lint from his suit jacket. "Greg, make sure she leaves. Now!" Greg's eyes locked on Alana, and he shifted his weight, looming even larger. Alana felt her knees go weak. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back spilled over, hot tracks down her cheeks. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs refused to obey, her mind screaming at her to run, even as her pride chained her in place. Greg exhaled slowly, clearly relishing his role. He stepped forward deliberately, one hand on his radio, the other lowering to rest on his utility belt in a silent, chilling warning. The crowd didn't speak, but Alana could feel them lean in, hungry for the next act of the performance they had been gifted for free, their collective gaze like a weight pressing her into the polished floor, pinning her down, leaving her nowhere to hide. Alana stood frozen as the words rattled in her ears, Davison's cold decree echoing like a gavel slammed in a courtroom designed solely to convict her without trial. Her tears streaked her face, burning with a mix of rage, humiliation, and fear that knotted in her stomach so tight she thought she might collapse. But she held herself up, refusing to give them the collapse they clearly wanted to see, refusing to sink to the polished granite floor even as her legs trembled. Greg shifted closer, his movements deliberate, heavy boots striking the ground with purpose, and he lowered his hand from the radio just long enough to give a small signal, a subtle jerk of his chin. But it was enough. Two other security guards emerged from near the customer service desks like well-trained dogs responding to a silent whistle. Alana saw them approaching through the blur of tears, their dark uniforms crisp and intimidating, their expressions blank but purposeful, eyes fixed on her like they'd already judged her as the threat to be neutralized, and panic rose sharp in her chest. Greg's voice was calm, almost bored, as he spoke into his radio, his thumb pressing down with a click that somehow seemed to punctuate her powerlessness. "Yeah, I'm going to need backup at the front," he said in a steady drawl that made her skin crawl. "We've got a non-compliant subject, might escalate. Be ready to remove her." Alana felt the words shatter something inside her, the official-sounding phrases turning her from a wronged customer into a suspect, a criminal, a threat that needed to be handled, and the change was as swift as it was cruel. She opened her mouth wanting to protest, wanting to scream that she had done nothing wrong, but no sound came out. Just a choked sob that made Greg's lip curl in barely concealed disdain. Around them, the lobby had gone eerily still, the buzz of small talk and polite business replaced by the electric hush of spectators who knew they were about to watch something entertaining. Their curiosity sharpened to cruelty. Alana felt their eyes scrape over her skin, felt the heat of their silent judgments. She heard someone mutter, "This is what happens," in a low voice meant to be overheard, and a soft, ugly chuckle followed. The two approaching guards flanked her without a word, positioning themselves on either side with military precision. Their arms crossed over their chests, shoulders squared, creating a human wall that boxed her in, suffocating her with the message that there was nowhere left to go but out. Greg leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to give the illusion of privacy, while ensuring everyone nearby could still hear. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm and devoid of empathy, "you need to leave now. Don't make this harder on yourself." Alana swallowed convulsively, her throat so tight it hurt, and forced herself to speak. "I just want my check cashed," she whispered hoarsely, her voice cracking like brittle glass. Greg's eyes hardened. "That's not happening today," he said flatly. He turned his head slightly, pretending to confer with one of the guards. "If she resists, we'll escort her physically." Alana's breath hitched at the word physically, her heart hammering so hard she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She took a half step back without realizing it, bumping into one of the guards, who didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the contact except for the way his jaw tightened, telegraphing his readiness to grab her the instant she gave them an excuse. Davison watched all of this from behind the counter, arms folded, a satisfied smirk tugging at his lips, the perfect picture of a man who had achieved exactly what he wanted. He didn't bother to hide it anymore. His eyes flicked to Kevin, who was doing a poor job of pretending not to watch, his hand covering his mouth to stifle a laugh. Alana saw it all. She felt it all. The weight of institutional power pressing down on her, the deliberate escalation, the rehearsed choreography of intimidation. She felt like an animal surrounded by predators, the threat of violence humming in the air, sanctioned and approved by the authority standing smugly behind the polished counter. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there and accept this. But she couldn't move. She was pinned in place by her own dignity, by the cold knowledge that any movement would be interpreted as aggression, as justification for them to lay hands on her, drag her out, screaming, giving them the final victory. Greg shifted again, angling his body so she couldn't see the door, blocking even her line of sight to freedom, and spoke into his radio once more. "Yeah, prep the front. We're removing a disruptive customer," he said in a tone so casual it made her want to vomit. "Might need local PD on standby." Alana felt her knees tremble. Police. The word was a death knell, the final threat. She felt the tears flood her eyes again, hot and furious. She hated them for it, hated herself for it. She tried to speak, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. Instead, she let out a ragged sob that made Jenna giggle quietly at her station. And then, as if scripted for maximum cruelty, the lobby doors swung open with their cheerful electronic chime, and Mr. Sterling, the VIP Davison had groveled before earlier, stepped out of the private office, his paperwork complete, his business concluded. He paused for just a heartbeat when he saw the scene in progress, his sharp gray eyes flicking from the security guards hemming Alana into Greg's hand on his belt to Davison's smug satisfaction. A slow, lazy smirk curled his lips as understanding dawned, and he took a step forward, clearing his throat in mock politeness that did nothing to hide the amusement glinting in his eyes. "Well now," he drawled, voice carrying easily across the hushed lobby. "Everything under control here?" Davison straightened even more, his eyes lighting up at the chance to perform again. "Perfectly, sir," he said, voice honey smooth. "Just dealing with a bit of trouble." Sterling's eyes flicked back to Alana, taking in her tear-stained face, her shaking shoulders, the absolute misery written in every line of her body. His smirk widened slightly, dripping with condescension. "Ah," he said lightly, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, best of luck then." He started to walk past, but paused at her shoulder, leaning in just enough that his breath ghosted over her ear. "Word of advice," he murmured, though his voice was pitched for the whole room. "Next time try a bank that's more your speed. Might save everyone some trouble." Alana jerked like she'd been slapped. A horrified, strangled sound bubbled in her throat. Around them, the murmur of the lobby turned uglier. Small huffs of laughter and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Confirmations filled the silence like toxic gas. Sterling didn't wait for a response. He patted his jacket pocket, adjusted his cuffs, and strolled leisurely toward the exit, not sparing her another glance, his words lingering in the air like a curse. Alana stood frozen for a heartbeat after Sterling's final, cutting remarks settled into the hush of the lobby like poison gas. Her face was wet with tears she couldn't even wipe away because her arms felt like lead, and she felt the last fragile threads of her composure unraveling as Davison beamed at the VIPs retreating back, eager to get rid of the embarrassment she represented once and for all. Greg shifted closer, his two backup guards tensing in unison as if ready to close in and physically remove her, their eyes cold and blank with bureaucratic cruelty. Alana's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst, the humiliation roaring in her ears like static. But through the haze of shame and fury, something inside her hardened into steel. She sucked in a shuddering breath, straightened her spine despite the tremor in her legs, and let her hand drift to the clasp of her briefcase with deliberate slowness. Greg's gaze followed the movement instantly, his hand tightening around the strap of his radio, as though ready to call for backup at the first twitch of resistance. But Alana ignored him, her fingers closing around her wallet. She pulled it out carefully, her breathing ragged but measured, and flipped it open so that the light caught the embossed logo on the small, rectangular card tucked in the front slot. The bank's own seal glimmered under the fluorescent lights, polished, official, unmistakable. The words beneath were printed in crisp black type. The Pinnacle Financial Group, Dr. Alana Hayes, Chief Ethics Officer. She didn't say a word at first. She simply held it up at chest height, turning her wrist just enough to ensure the men boxing her in could read it without question. The room seemed to freeze. The smirk slid off Davison's face like melting wax, leaving behind something pale and pinched that made Alana want to laugh if she hadn't been on the verge of sobbing. Kevin's mouth fell open behind the counter, his fingers going slack around the mouse he'd been gripping with white knuckles of cruel anticipation. Even Jenna's whispered, snide laughter cut off abruptly, replaced by a stunned silence so complete that Alana heard the faint whir of the bank's AC system and the distant tick of the wall clock. Greg didn't move, his eyes flicking from the card to her face and back again, suspicion battling with dawning horror as the truth settled over him like a cold, wet shroud. Alana let the silence stretch just long enough for the meaning to burn itself into their minds. The weight of her position, the legitimacy of her presence, the utter absurdity of the accusation they had leveled at her. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but devastatingly clear, cutting through the hush like a scalpel. "You want proof?" she said, each syllable trembling with controlled fury. She lifted the card a fraction higher. "Here's my proof. I work here. I am the chief ethics officer of this entire financial group. My name is on every regulatory policy that governs this branch." Davison made a strangled sound in the back of his throat, somewhere between a cough and a gasp, and took a half step back before catching himself. His eyes darted wildly to Kevin, who looked like he might actually be sick. Alana's voice rose, shaking but unstoppable. "You think you're protecting this bank from me? You think you're doing your job by humiliating a client in front of a lobby full of people?" Her words dripped acid. "Do you even know whose signature was on that check you tore up?" She let the question hang there, rhetorical and cruel. No one answered. She didn't give them the chance. She twisted the card in her fingers once more before sliding it back into her wallet with deliberate precision, snapping it shut like a gavel coming down on their heads. "That check," she said, in a voice gone low and deadly, "was signed by Marcus Thorne, your chairman, my husband." The hush in the room imploded into a strangled gasp of collective realization, the whispers turning frantic and horrified as customers shifted uncomfortably, craning their necks to see Davison's reaction. The spectacle was no longer about a suspected fraudster, but about the spectacular unmasking of a liar, an incompetent manager, a man so drunk on petty power he hadn't even bothered to verify the claim that would now likely destroy him. Davison's lips moved soundlessly for a moment, his face blanching to a shade so pale it was nearly gray. When he finally found his voice, it cracked like a teenager's, shrill and pathetic. "Now, ma'am." Alana cut him off with a single lifted hand, her fingers trembling but steady enough to silence him. "Don't!" she spat. Her voice was shaking, thick with emotion, but it had an edge of command that made Greg and the two guards flinch as if slapped. She turned her gaze to them next, eyes burning through the blur of tears. "Are you still planning to put your hands on me? To escort me out of my own building?" The younger of the two backup guards actually took a step back, horror dawning in his eyes, while Greg's jaw clenched so hard the muscle in his cheek twitched. His hand dropped from his radio like it had been burned. Alana didn't let up. She turned back to Davison with surgical precision, pinning him to the spot with a glare that could have split granite. "Go ahead," she challenged, her voice rising despite the tremor. "Call security. Call the police. Call anyone you want. Let's see what your chairman says when he hears how you treat his wife." Howard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound emerged. The lobby had gone so quiet she could hear someone breathing heavily near the front door. A woman actually whispered, "Oh my God," into the hush, her voice trembling with second-hand embarrassment at the absolute disaster unfolding. Alana drew in a ragged breath, gathering the last of her dignity around her like a cloak, and lifted her chin so high her tears threatened to spill down her neck. "Call him," she said, her voice iron and ice. "Call Marcus, now. I want to speak to my husband about how his employees handle their clients." Davison swallowed so hard it was audible. His hands twitched at his sides like he wanted to do anything other than move, his face a rictus of shame and terror. Kevin had stopped pretending he wasn't listening and was now just staring openly, eyes wide as saucers. Even Jenna looked stricken, her mouth hanging open in a perfect circle of horror, her earlier cruel delight gone without a trace. Greg shifted from foot to foot, his gaze dropping to the floor, his authority leaking out of him like air from a slashed tire. Alana's voice dropped again, softer, but no less dangerous. "I'm waiting," she said. The silence was deafening. The silence that followed Alana's final words was so complete, it felt like the entire bank had been plunged underwater. The quiet pressed in around them, heavy and suffocating. And for a long moment, no one moved or even seemed to breathe. Davison's face remained frozen in that ghastly shade of pale, his lips parted as if he might stammer another excuse, but no sound emerged. Alana didn't blink. She held her gaze steady on him, her chest rising and falling with labored, furious breaths that finally felt like her own. Greg's eyes darted from her to Davison to Kevin, his fingers twitching at his utility belt as if muscle memory wanted him to threaten her again. But realization dawned, slow and sickly, draining the last of his intimidation from his posture. He exhaled, rough and uncertain, and let his hand drop away from the belt entirely, palms now open in a placating gesture. "Ma'am," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't realize," but he couldn't finish. The words died on his tongue because there was no salvaging the stance he had taken. Alana didn't spare him a glance. Her stare burned into Davison, daring him to say another word, and Davison wilted before her eyes. Behind the counter, Kevin looked like he might faint, one hand pressed over his mouth to hide his open shock. Beside him, Jenna had gone gray under her makeup, her eyes flicking between Alana and Davison in frantic panic. When Alana's gaze finally slid over to her, Jenna actually jumped. She tried, to paste on a smile so brittle it looked painful. "Dr. Hayes, I'm so sorry. We didn't know," Jenna stammered, her voice a hideous sing-song of customer service desperation. Of course you work here. We were just following procedure." Alana didn't speak. She didn't need to. The contempt in her silence said everything. Jenna's voice cracked on another apology, the words disintegrating into a strangled half-laugh that died before it was born. She looked down at her register, her shoulders curling in as if to make herself smaller. Greg cleared his throat, an awful rasping sound, and shifted closer, though now he kept both hands in plain sight, as if he was afraid she might actually call the police on him. "Look, Dr. Hayes," he said, trying to smooth his tone into something professional, but it came out clumsy and desperate. "There's no need to escalate further, all right? We can get this resolved for you immediately, no trouble at all." Alana slowly turned her gaze on him then, and his mouth snapped shut so completely it was like a physical recoil. She didn't say a word, letting the silence stretch and twist until his eyes darted to the floor like a scolded child. All around them, the lobby had gone utterly still, except for the buzz of whispered gossip that rippled in waves. Customers craned their necks to see, wide-eyed and rapt, their phones lowering in embarrassment or fear of being caught recording the wrong side of history. Kevin finally managed to squeak out, "Dr. Hayes, I'll get your account pulled up right now." His fingers were shaking so badly on the keyboard that he mistyped twice before the system beeped at him in electronic impatience. Alana didn't bother responding. She was done speaking to them. She'd given them all the rope they needed to hang themselves and was content now to watch them squirm. But before anyone could fumble for another pathetic apology, the heavy glass doors at the front of the bank swung open with a gust of cold, conditioned air and the cheerful chime that now felt grotesquely out of place. Heads turned in unison. For the first time since Alana had entered the bank that morning, there was a shift in energy that wasn't directed at humiliating her. It was fear. Real, naked fear. Because Marcus Thorne had arrived. He strode into the lobby with a kind of command that couldn't be faked. His tailored suit cut razor-sharp against the lean muscle of a man who spent his life wielding power and expected nothing less than total compliance. His eyes were dark and cold and searching, scanning the lobby with a predator's precision until they landed on his wife. And when they did, something flickered in them. Fury, protectiveness, and the absolute promise of consequences. Alana didn't move. She didn't need to. The raw relief she felt at seeing him was almost enough to make her legs buckle, but she held herself rigid, chin lifted, daring anyone in the room to miss the connection. Marcus's gaze swept over her tear-stained face, the tense set of her shoulders, and then moved slowly to Greg, standing uselessly beside her, to the two backup guards trying not to breathe, to Jenna trembling behind the counter, to Kevin blinking rapidly like he might cry himself, and finally, to Davison. Davison, who looked like he'd seen death incarnate walk in through those doors. "Alana," Marcus said, his voice low and lethal. "Are you all right?" She didn't answer in words. She simply held his gaze, her lips trembling as she forced a nod. That was enough. Marcus's attention snapped to Davison so fast it was whiplash. He took 2 unhurried steps forward, the weight of his authority crashing over the room like a tidal wave. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, which made it that much more terrifying. "Davison," he drawled, every syllable ice. "Do you want to explain to me exactly why my wife is standing here looking like she's been dragged through hell?" Davison made a strangled squeak, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. No words came. Marcus's eyes narrowed to slits. "You tore up her check," he continued, his voice somehow softer, deadlier. "A check that bore my signature. You accused her of fraud. You threatened her with security." He let the words hang, each one hitting like a hammer. "Tell me, Davison," Marcus said finally, his voice dropping to a whisper you could hear in the rafters. "Who exactly did you think signed that check?" Davison made another pathetic noise, but the words wouldn't come. Kevin was openly crying now, tears sliding down his cheeks in silent horror. Jenna was shaking so hard the coins in her register rattled. Greg had gone pale as wax, his mouth pinched tight. The customers, who had been so eager to watch Alana's humiliation, were now cowed into silence, their eyes wide with second-hand terror at witnessing real power wielded like a scalpel. Alana said nothing. She didn't have to. Marcus Thorne was here now, and he would do the talking for her. And as the hush stretched out in the sterile, overlit lobby, you could hear Davison's dignity break apart like rotted wood under the weight of what he had done. The silence in the lobby held for a long, terrible moment after Marcus Thorne's final question, the air thick with a fear and shame so palpable it felt like a physical presence pressing against everyone's skin. In that silence, Davison's face seemed to collapse in on itself, his features crumpling as he swallowed hard. His lips trembled, desperate to form an excuse, but there was no justification that would suffice now. Alana stood frozen at Marcus's side, her breathing ragged but steadying. She watched as the same customers who had jeered and filmed her humiliation now shrank back, their eyes wide with guilty fascination. Marcus's gaze never wavered from Davison's face. "You tore up my wife's check," he said again, his voice a lethal calm. "You called security on her. You humiliated her in front of a lobby full of people. Tell me why, Davison." Davison's mouth worked uselessly. I thought... Marcus held up a single finger, and Davison fell silent like a dog trained to the command. Marcus inhaled slowly, visibly fighting to contain the fury radiating from him. "Enough," he said, and the word cracked like a gunshot. He turned his gaze next to Greg, whose eyes had dropped to the floor. "Greg," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. "You threatened my wife. You physically intimidated her. You escalated the situation with deliberate force, all while failing to do the single most basic part of your job, protecting our clients, especially her." Greg's mouth opened. "Mr. Thorne, turn in your badge and your company ID before you leave," Marcus interrupted, his voice like ice. "You are terminated, effective immediately." The words landed like hammers. Greg's face went chalk white. "Sir, please, it was a misunderstanding." "Your misunderstanding has cost this company its reputation in less than an hour," Marcus stated flatly. "You're done here." Greg's shoulders collapsed. He turned slightly, his eyes glassy, his fingers trembling as they drifted toward his badge. Beside the counter, Jenna let out a strangled sob. Marcus's eyes snapped to her next, and she froze. He didn't give her the dignity of pretending to consider a plea. "Jenna," he said, his voice hard and unyielding. "Your mocking, your insults, your cruelty, all of it happened in front of a lobby full of witnesses. You think these people didn't record it?" Jenna shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "Please, sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," Marcus spat, his politeness gone, replaced by raw disgust. "You will resign immediately, or you will be terminated for cause. I don't care which." Jenna's sob turned into a choked scream she tried to swallow. She fumbled at her register for her purse, the contents spilling onto the floor with a clatter. Marcus turned back to Davison, whose shoulders were shaking. "As for you," he said, his voice dropping into a lethal hush, "you're suspended effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. HR will contact you about your disciplinary hearing. I suggest you get a lawyer. Your career in this industry is over." Davison let out a sob that turned into a ragged exhale, his head dropping as the reality settled upon him. The lobby was deathly silent. But Marcus wasn't finished. His gaze swept over the entire lobby. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, addressing not just the staff, but everyone. "What happened today is disgraceful. I will not have it in any branch of this institution. Anyone who finds this acceptable has no place here." No one dared to speak. Kevin was crying openly now. Jenna's sobs were muffled but audible. Greg just stood there, badge limp in his hand, staring at the floor. Davison looked like a statue carved from shame. Alana drew in a shaky breath and straightened, wiping at her own tears. When she lifted her head, she was all steel. She was vindication. Marcus turned to her and held out his hand. She took it without hesitation, their fingers locking in a silent show of solidarity that no one in that lobby would ever forget. Even as justice was being served, the consequences had already begun. At the far end of the lobby, several customers were still holding up their phones, recording every word of Marcus's tirade. Within the hour, the videos would hit social media like wildfire. The Pinnacle Financial Group would trend for all the wrong reasons. Headlines would follow. Bank manager accuses CEO's wife of fraud in viral video. Comment sections would explode with outrage and calls for boycotts. The damage was done. The stain was indelible. The brand that prided itself on elite service would be rebranded overnight as a poster child for institutional bigotry, a cautionary tale for decades to come. Alana watched it begin in real time. She could see the shock on the faces around her as they realized what they had just witnessed wasn't going to stay private, it would live forever. And she didn't look away. She made herself see every expression. She made herself remember, because she would never let them forget. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful narratives about justice and redemption, don't forget to like and follow. It helps us keep telling these kinds of stories. Tell us in the comments, which moment hit you hardest? What would you have done in Alana's place? And let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community grow all over the world.